Hey everybody, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat if you want while we're waiting. There's the hello. All right, guys, y'all set? I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, hi everyone. I'm Bill Conforti with Association Analytics. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual discussion series where we bring together leaders and learners each week in fun and engaging sessions aimed at optimizing business results, staying relevant in these challenging times, and learning some cool stuff in the process. Today's session is about content experience, strategy, and delivery. With our friends from American Eagle, we'll dive into what is content, how to inform content decisions, and we'll look at our new recommender system technology to help automate some of the content delivery and ultimately improve the member experience. A couple of notes for our attendees. We have a recording of today's session. It's available on the registration site. If you've missed any of our previous sessions, the recordings for all of them are available. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. Please use the chat tool to connect with others on the webinar and use the Q&A button to submit questions for the panel. So as we go along, I'll be monitoring those and passing along any questions that you have to our panelists. So speaking of panelists, let me go ahead and introduce these guys. We got a couple of smart guys, really smart guys on the panel today. First is Matt Lesnak. Matt leads our product development and technology for A2. And he's the primary architect of the Acumen solution, contributing a unique combination of technology, business and strategy skills, along with strong association knowledge, and generally being one of the hardest working guys in the business. Matt's career in the association world began with his role as business intelligence manager for the International City County Management Association. Before that, he led e-commerce business intelligence for a Fortune 500 retailer and provided professional services for a Silicon Valley software company, as well as building the financial modules for an ERP application. Matt has a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon in electronic commerce, along with the master's in public policy from George Mason University. It provides valuable insight into mission-driven organizations. Matt has a PMP along with numerous BI and data science certifications. He's an avid follower of public policy, economics, business, and professional wrestling. That was a long one. All right, Wolfgang, senior digital strategist, as well as a content and experience practice lead at American Eagle, a full-service global digital agency that provides world-class web design, development, hosting, and support, and digital strategy, as well as digital marketing services. With deep roots in print and digital journalism, he has more than 25 years of experience in digital and content strategy, content marketing and management, with a focus on audience acquisition and conversion. Before American Eagle, he was director of digital strategy, content strategy, and analytics for CompTIA, a leading IT industry association, where he helped expand the organization's registered audience from 7,000 to more than 200,000 users and increase certification revenue by more than 30%. And lastly, he's not just a content strategist, but also a creator. He was once founded and published a technology news blog with more than 2 million monthly readers, and has authored more than 20,000 articles for IT magazines in the US and Europe since 1995. So a lot there. Two really smart, accomplished guys. Looking forward to getting their insights in today's talk. So quick look at the agenda. We're gonna go through just for fun, really fast, just to get some conversations going in the chat. We're gonna look at some key concepts, which are essentially reviewing some of the things that we've talked about in previous weeks, and really how all of this sort of is underlined by two key concepts, which are data and content. We're gonna get an introduction into our recommendations engine, which Matt is gonna go into in a little bit more detail later on. Wolfgang has a really good talk on content experience that he's gonna go through. There's a lot to learn there. And then we're gonna wrap it up again with content delivery piece, which is mainly focused on the recommendations engine. Okay, so just for fun. So this is kind of specific to people in the DC area, but so I've been here pretty much my whole life, a longtime Redskins fan, and without being political about it, whether you agree that the name should be changed or not, it's kind of the time has come, right? It's going to happen here shortly, looks like. So I'm wondering if anyone has any good ideas or suggestions for the Redskins organization for what the new name should be. Right, so if you're keeping up with it, there's a couple of things that are getting floated around. There's the Warriors, which I don't particularly like. There's Washington State, Red Shifts, love it. That's good, Jason. The Sentinels is out there, and then there's a bunch of like plays on the word red, so they can keep the name, keep the colors and all that. So there's Red Hawks, Red Tails, Red Hogs is one that I've heard. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Hogs in the Redskins or Gridlocks. Okay. Anyway, the losing team, that's great. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's going to be the case for a while. So anyway, so keep your suggestions coming. Maybe we can get a movement going here. Anyway, so let's get started then with our poll question. So Brian, if you could put that up. The poll question is, to what extent does your association use data to inform content decisions? We have always, most of the time, sometimes, or not at all, never. We'll give you, say, 20 or 30 seconds to answer, and then we'll go ahead and dive into this. So Sarah says, could you ask people to click on all panelists and attendees? Yeah, so there's at the bottom of the chat, there's a small drop-down window where it says the default for some reason is all panelists, but if you go down and choose from that menu and say all panelists and attendees, then you can get your comments seen by all the people on the call. All right. Okay, so let's see the results. Sometimes, right? So as expected. Okay, so that's pretty encouraging actually to see 21% saying most of the time, right? So that's bigger than the not at all. As expected, mostly in the sometimes. I think that's where that's where most of us are, right? We can definitely improve, but we're trying to do the right things some of the time. Any guys have any comments on that? That's surprising to you guys, Wolfgang or Matt? No. Okay. All right, so let's jump into some of those key concepts that I was talking about. So the first thing is know your members and be there in the time of need, right? So this is kind of going back a few weeks. We had Reggie Henry from ASAE. He talks frequently about the importance of knowing your members, and we had that example of this member that asked Reggie why he didn't know her better based on all of her experiences and all of her transactions and things that she had with ASAE. We talked about being there in the time of need. So it's not just about the right product or the right service, right piece of content, but the timing is important, right? So we had a good discussion about intelligent micro engagements that prompt action. So that was where we're asking members questions, right, to see what they want, and then kind of acting accordingly with some sort of automated workflow. We talked a lot about increasing engagement through use of your online communities. So we know that more members are in those communities now really than ever before. And we talked about year-round engagement through mobile apps, right? So basically, and then always we kind of underlie that with the importance of a platform like Acumen to kind of wrangle all the data from the different platforms to inform these kinds of decisions, right? So the idea is that all of these things are related to obviously to data and to content. We talked about a little bit about website best practices a few weeks ago, and then how to drive traffic to your site. So Dave Martin came on and he kind of advised us, right? You want to market with a magnet, not with a megaphone, right? And so to do this, obviously you need to know a lot about the members, right? So it's all about data and it's all about content. So when it comes to those data informed decisions, it's the data needs to be comprehensive, right? You have to consider both how the individual behaves, as well as the characteristics of the content or the products and services that they're consuming. And all of that data lives in a lot of different places, right? So we have up in the top corner, we have our AMS transactions, we have our email interactions, clicks and opens and whatever. We have our web and mobile clicks, on your website. We have collaboration, posts and comments and things that happen in the community. products and services that are consumed through your LMS, and not to mention content creation, right? So we need to know about the people as well as the products, right? So we're going to get started with content experience, right? But before we do that, I just want to quickly introduce what Matt's going to be talking about later, and that's going to be our recommendations engine, right? So we're going to learn how you use all the data that you're gathering, right, to inform the content creation process, but also it's a key part of the content delivery, right? So there's this is an image that you may have even seen this online. It's kind of a frequently, if you look at information about recommendations engine, they always talk about Netflix, they talk about Spotify, and these are companies that are spending millions or tens of millions of dollars on systems like this, and they kind of fall into a couple of different different buckets, right? So there's the playlist generators like Pandora or Spotify use for video or for music services or for videos. There's the product recommenders that you get on Amazon or really any place that you buy things online. Then there's content recommenders that you see on social media platforms and news sites and things like that. So these operate on sometimes on a single input, like in the case of music, or multiple inputs, which can be within and across platforms, including news, books, search queries, and things like that. So what's cool is that it's not just for these big giant companies anymore. We can start to apply the similar methods to delivering the right content at the right time for our members and customers in our associations. All right. So with that brief intro, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Wolfgang, and he's going to talk about content experience.
All right. Thank you, Bill. Hello, everybody. I think this is going to be, I think, an interesting conversation here. So up until about a year ago or so, we defined very much everything that we did in content as content strategy or content marketing. But we did realize that there were trends going on that really evolved into a scenario that wasn't fitting the term content strategy or content marketing anymore. There was something bigger going on, and we needed to adjust to that, and we adjusted our offering accordingly. And what was going on, this trend was very much relating to this quote here, which some of you may know. So you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. That quote is actually by Steve Jobs, and he mentioned that in 1997 when he just returned to Apple. He was brought back as a consultant to literally save the company. And he said that quote during a keynote presentation, during a QA. So you can look that quote actually up, it's on YouTube, which pretty much defined the entire Apple product strategy that was coming up. And what he really said here is that before you think about a product, right, and you can think about content as your product, you shouldn't think so much about the specifications of the product. You should think about what it enables people to do. So first think about the experience and then think about the specifications that would enable that experience. And if you think that time back then, so it was gigahertz and gigabytes that was selling these products, that was a pretty interesting idea. And it wasn't met with a whole lot of agreement, but it is something that was very interesting and was a foundation for Apple's success that was following. So when you think about what really happened, and so I'm trying to go on the next slide here. So when you think what happened, right, so this was in 1997. In 1998, Apple introduced the iMac. And when you think about how he played or how Apple played with content here, as well as the product and brought in the experience, that was something really interesting. So the iMac was a personal computer, but if you think about it, everything was a beige, ugly box. It was something that you were hiding under your desk. He was thinking about something personal again that you would put on your family room desk that you wouldn't hide. And within its advertising, they actually said hello, right? It made it very personal. So it was literally relating to the experience. He didn't market the processor, how many gigahertz it had. He didn't talk about the speed of the CD-ROM drive or those kind of things. No, he talked about the experience, right? And then shortly thereafter, in 2001, I believe, Apple introduced the iPod. And they also didn't say it was 5 gigabytes, right? So what they said is 1,000 songs in your pocket. So they literally refer to the experience of the product. They never said 5 gigabytes in their advertising. They said that. And if you think a little bit more about it, it was really iTunes that was built as the experience that enabled the long-term success of the iPod. 5 gigabytes or a certain weight of the device or even the materials could have never cemented the success as it did here. And then you can think down the line, think about the iPhone or the iPad, right, with the experience built in the App Store. So it was literally not the specifications of the device, it was always the experience. So this is something really interesting. And the question there really is, well, why does this matter to content? It matters to content because if you think about content strategy, until recently, content strategy was really a matter of quantity, right? So you think about blog posts, we were thinking about write as many blog posts as you can, write as many research reports that you can, and just push them out through all the channels that you have. But what you're creating is you're creating content oversaturation, right? So all the channels you have mobile phones, you have your computers, you have videos, you have social media, all these things, you're really hammered with a lot of content and you're unable to consume the content anymore. The content that succeeds is the one that also considers metrics of quality, right? So it's not just about quantity, it's not just about 50 blog posts that you're pushing out, it is literally about, maybe there are 10 blog posts that you're writing instead of those 50, but they're the right ones. So the way how we think about content experience in a very brief form is think about creating the right content for the right user at the right time. So this is the overall idea where we really started thinking about content experience. The next item is, let's get a little bit closer what really content experience is and the way how we think about it and how we apply it. So the first thing you would really have to do is you would have to define content. What exactly is content? And I would take a good bet. If you talk to people in your organization, and depending on who you talk to, you get different ideas and you get a whole lot of different definitions of it. Now, of course, you could go to Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia, you get about 900 words of explanations. You get about 40, 50 footnotes, and all of those, they give you more than 1 million search results. So the definition of content when you go the Wikipedia route, or if you go the route of your colleagues, may not help. The way how we define content is really in 3 tiers. And that is much more practical for the content strategy or content experience that you're working with. So you have a basic understanding throughout your organization what your content is. So we think about it in tiers. So the first tier is content that you always can consume directly without thinking about it, right? So it's the text that you have, it's images that you can see. It is something that you very passively consume, that is something that you see without doing anything else. The second tier of content is content that requires interaction, right? So you would have your menu at the top, you would move along the menu line and would choose something from the menu. It could be a video play button, it could be a call to action button that you see here, view membership benefits here. So all of these things that require you to do something before you can consume the content, that is the second tier of content. The third tier is content that you don't see as a user. It is content that you may not immediately be aware of, but you're consuming anyway. So you have all your SEO information, for example, meta information that you have in the site. It may be archived information. It may also be information that is published on other websites that is created through link partnerships, for example, or content partnerships. So this is the third tier. When you consider these 3 tiers, you can create a baseline and a baseline of understanding of content. Now, what we're doing here, though, is we're really looking only at on-page content. And content on a website is never only about one page. So what you see here on the right side of the screen, you see an image how Google would be seeing your website. So in this example, all the red, green bubbles are content that is indexable, that the content could see. They're connected through links that are going back and forth, and you would have certain site sections that are being called out. All the red things here, these are all non-indexed items or redirected items, but this is a way how Google would be crawling your website, how it would actually create your ranking for a website. And what's important about this here is that these structures, they're not just created through certain, content tiers that we just talked about, what they are created is, in addition to the tiers, you have different content types, right? There might be downloadable content such as PDFs or videos that you may have on there, or text documents or spreadsheets or templates that you may have. And the other item is taxonomy that you're going through here. So taxonomy is really helping to build that structure for you. What you get is a very cohesive structure of a content ecosystem that is built on a lot of dependencies. So when you make changes to your content ecosystem, you're actually not just changing the content on the site that you have. If you change call to action buttons, for example, you're most likely changing that structure as well here. So that's something really important to keep in mind. The next item that is a question that I receive at least once a week when we're working with clients, and the question is, what exactly is good content? And it is also a question and an answer system that different people may answer that differently, but we found this rule of 8 here a very reliable answer to that question, and it is really the foundation of all your content efforts. That is the very foundation of your success. So the basic idea here is everything in good content can be measured in some way. So when you go through here, we're going to go from the left top and then go around. So first of all, your content should always be defined by data, right? So you should always have a good idea of the data behind your content decision, of why you're publishing certain content or why you're not publishing certain content. So this is really important. And I'm going to go back to this a little later because there's some exceptions to it. Then we do have clarity of content. It should be very clear, and you should be able to understand content on a website without being too fluffy on it, without confusing terms. We have also jargon in there, so avoiding that kind of item is very important too. There needs to be brand identification in your content. This is something very clear. Actionable content, mostly through call to actions and clear linking. Relevant content, well, people should be caring about your content, or otherwise you shouldn't be publishing it. Accuracy is very important of your content. Content being concise is important, especially for associations if you see increased engagement via cell phones. Imagine the amount of content that you're really publishing. Being concise and not being fluffy in your content is extremely important. And then the cohesiveness that I just talked about in terms of content supporting user journeys throughout your entire website is also a foundational item of good content.
Wolfgang, I wonder if I could interrupt you with a quick question.
Sure.
To talk about those blue boxes there, the 8 boxes, as you said, these kinds of things need to be measurable, right?
Right.
And so everybody probably thinks their content is good, right? But how do you know, right? How do you measure some of these things around the box here?
There's probably multiple ways how you can do it. I can give you an example how we are doing this. We're lining all of these up against user journey, right? The reason why you operate a website in the first place is because you have certain goals that are tied to it. In some cases, this might be lead capture. In some cases, it might be membership, subscription, those kind of things. And all these items here, they're going to be lined up against goals, right? So for example, define data, define content, we don't have to go into that too much, right? Because it would tell you, should you publish another blog post or do you go with another research report? On the clarity it is always about driving people through progressive information growth, right? No matter if you have a member that is a prospect or a prospect member, or you have a member that you're trying to engage continuously, whether these are events or these are resources, or whether these are conversions towards retention. Clarity of content will give you a really good idea in terms of, do I move a user on from one web page to another that is really critical to that user journey, right? So branding is something that you can very easily measure, especially through tools such as SEMrush, right? So these are SEO tools that would give you an idea of brand recognition. Actionable, well, it goes along with clarity, where you would move somebody along a user path. These are events measurements that you can do. Are my actions clear? Are they moving someone along? Relevancy, this goes to engagement metrics, right? So what kind of page views do I have on this? What kind of landing page views do I have on this? Also UX tools that you could use. There are some tools out there such as, I don't want to put some advertising out there, but tools, like Hotjar, Crazy Egg, they would give you an idea, do people actually read my content or do they just read the headline and I'm losing them? So that is something. Accuracy, I think, is very easy to measure, right? We should be accurate when we can. Concise, that is something I spoke very quickly to it. It is really about cell phones, right? Is the content really good? How does it perform on cell phones, for example? And then cohesiveness, it goes towards the user journey again. So when you think about it, it's all about acquisition, engagement, and conversion. Does that make
Awesome.
sense?
Thank you. Yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
All right, so then the obvious question, the next one is, so what if my content is good? How do I make it great? That is an evolution that we are not seeing a whole lot of clients that we have making yet that step. It is something a lot of our clients are looking in, and I think it is really the next phase of content growth. So we are referring to great content as dynamic content. When you do have a content experience or content strategy even in place, you should always anticipate changes. Content requirements and content scenarios and ecosystems, they roughly change twice a year. So there are new trends, new technologies, new user behaviors coming out. And it is absolutely critical that these trends are being seen and your content can be changed and adapted, right? This might be as easy as rewriting or restructuring a page. And a current example might be that I can throw in here is that at one point, landing pages or category landing pages that you may have on your website, they were extremely effective. There is a new trend that goes towards contextual landing pages that have a whole lot more content on there than just a few pieces of content. So this was one of these items where people and organizations are scrambling right now. How do we do this? There are some scenarios, especially in e-commerce, they're extremely competitive with contextual landing pages. I think an example would be if you were to look for washers and dryers on Google, and you would then see always 4 companies at the top. You always find Home Depot, Lowe's, Costco, and Best Buy, and all of those have very good variations of contextual landing pages that have different kinds of content that relate to one single topic to it. So this is also something that is going to become more important for association. The next item is effortless consumption. Goes a little bit into clarity and being concise, but we're really talking about readability here. A lot of associations, especially, are struggling with having the right tone and translating the brand style into content that can also be easily consumed. So we are putting more metrics behind readability of content and making sure that content is readable by an audience that has an 8th grade education. And there are some tools out there that can give you that. So really important. So we're going to go a little bit closer to content experience here. So with all that in mind, what I just said is there is a content role change that has happened, and you may have seen that happening so over the past 4, 5, 6 years. If you think back to content publication in the early 1990s when the World Wide Web came up, it was really about publishing as much content as you could. The second phase, Web 2.0, was all about e-commerce, and people started thinking about conversion. And then in the late 2000s and beginning 2010s and mid 2010s, what we saw is social media being not just invented, but taking over a next phase of the internet that we generally refer to as the social media revolution or content 3.0. And what happened here is that suddenly technology people started realizing the content was actually not just following their technology innovations, it was actually driving their innovations. And with data now in place, this becomes even more prevalent. If you think about technologies such as AR or VR or AI, all these kind of technologies that are really on the horizon right now and being developed, they would not be possible without content. So content has actually reversed the roles, not just becoming a technology follower, but it has become a technology driver. So what you're doing in content is extremely critical for the development of your website. And if you think about it more like in a metaphorical way, you can think about your website or the technology like your CMS that you have as a foundation of your website. It's the skeleton, right? The bones of your presence. If you add content, you add the muscle fabric to help the skeleton stand up and actually move in a certain direction. So without that content, your website isn't going anywhere. So this has substantially changed in terms of the role of content over the past 5, 6, 7 years. When we do talk to clients about their content experience and content strategy, what we found is they do measure their goals typically in 3 categories. And it always seemed to be that categories. There could be some variation in it, but it's always those 3 buckets. And you could imagine that as a mission critical dashboard. And so when you think on the very left, at the beginning of content, you always have a certain kind of business direction, right? That might be membership growth or membership retention or more attendees to an event, those kind of things. It's these kind of goals that are being set by the leadership, and then hopefully at the other end there's some sort of a positive outcome. Your content stands right between those 2 items. And the dials, if you imagine it as a dials, the ones that you can turn on, you could invest in acquisition. You could invest in more advertising. You could be sending out more emails. You could be improving your SEO, those kind of things, right? So that's all acquisition bucket. The second bucket is typically qualification. This is lead capture. This is the time when you have people coming to your website and you would like to start talking with them and communicating with them. So that's the second bucket you could be investing in. The third bucket is you're going to invest in conversion. That's the most difficult one, obviously. But as a content strategist or a content leader, business leader, these are the things that you have in mind typically when you say, how do I reach my business result? Which dial do I turn how far? And this brings us actually to the next slide here, because it goes very deep into analytics. So when you look at the analytics of your website, and you get, as a content person or as a business leader, you typically have always 3 steps that you would go through, so we can go from your answer to your answer. From the question to your answer, I'm sorry. So the first thing is you first have to understand what exactly is the question. And a business owner would ask a question always differently than you would answer it, that a content person would answer it, or a data analyst would answer it, right? So for example, a business owner may come along and say, my leads are down. I need some help here from you. I have no idea what's going on, but you need to figure out what we need to do to get the leads back up. So there is no metric that would automatically tell you, other than the leads themselves, that they are down, to help you figure out what is going on. What you typically do, and what we do, what we found most helpful here, is we actually do create a analytics journey map. So you have your direct KPI, what would be the number of leads, but we always have, for each of those key KPIs that we have indirect key KPIs that are impacting those lead KPIs. So for example, the number of organic visitors may be impacting your lead capture by a certain percentage. Your paid advertising may be doing that. There may be certain consumption of content pieces that may be impacting your conversion to a lead. There may be certain pages that are not being visited anymore, and it could be a drop in SEO, those kind of things. So you have to create this kind of journey map in order figuring out what is going on. And it would always relate to that user journey of acquisition, engagement, and conversion. The second item, once you have that journey map, you kind of need to figure out what kind of data sources do I have. And we find in a normal scenario these days, there is never a lack of data sources. There's always too many data sources, and it's important to put those data sources together, right? And in many cases, you have more data sources than you may be even aware of, right? Aside to a web analytics aggregator, such as Google Analytics, for example, you may have those behavioral analytics tools that show you how someone would use a page. You do have a competitor analysis, right? There are tools like, I don't know, like SimilarWeb or those kind of things. They're out there. And then SEO analytics, you have your user surveys that are very indicative of certain behavior on the website. Member services or customer service, there's a really interesting data source that sometimes is undervalued for web. There's your CRM or email service, e-commerce data that you may have. So all of these in there. So you have to all consider those when answering actually those questions. Matt,
and I think,
Matt, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are all really valuable engagement touch points to understand customers and how they interact with data and content and products. And of course, this is a big part of what Association Analytics does, is bringing that data together for analysis. But in addition to just bringing it into a platform, it's important to group and categorize it in an optimal way for analysis, as well as applying taxonomies, for example. And from a content standpoint, really taking a consolidated view, meaning viewing the same content as a single piece of content that is available across different channels and mediums, and it's not fragmented. So you can analyze it and understand it in a more efficient way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Matt. I think there was an interesting question in here that I saw earlier about how to benchmark those data, right? I think it goes a little bit into drawing conclusions on this and you know, what it really means. And it's always a good idea to have a process for analyzing the data that you have, because you do have way more data than you can use, right? So in terms of benchmarking data, and if it refers to literally levels of data, I think there is, if you're in an organization and you're not working with an agency that may have more insight into how typically benchmarks work, and you know, what is a typical retention benchmark, and what are click rates, and what are menu rates, how many people should be looking in your About Us section, those kind of things. I think you're going to have to establish those level over time, and I would recommend doing that, and simply have a very good baseline of what it is and then improve from there. However, in terms of interpretation, I think there's three items that when I'm working with clients that we always look at. First of all, you want to know if you're dealing with an anomaly or a trend, right? So don't get too upset if certain data fall off the cliff, and check if there's some anomaly that is going on. And in most cases, these anomalies, they can be fixed very briefly. Maybe there's an SEO issue going on that can be fixed briefly. Maybe there is an email that didn't work well, or maybe there's a call to action, or maybe a page has gone offline. So these kind of things. So figure that one out first, right, before you take any actions on that. The next one is, if it is a trend that is going on, think about the risks and the opportunities that you have, and weigh what direction you should go, right? So is that a problem for you, that that certain things happen on your website? Is that something that you should address? In many cases, you actually can turn a risk into an opportunity, and there's a really good idea to use the data sources that you have to get an overall picture. The other item is a competitor analysis, and we're doing this more and more here, because we do know that no matter what industry you look at, there are some places and some websites that already have solved the problem, and they are doing that very well. And we're trying to do, whenever we are working with clients, we're trying to figure out what the competitive scenario is. We look at their performance, and we try to understand what they're doing well and what they are not doing so well. So when I'm talking to clients, typically we're phrasing this in a way of giving them an unfair advantage, to simply figuring out, based on the analytics that we know, what we can approve quickly or not. So when you have these kind of things, is the answers always are actionable, right? So from an analytics point of view, they are never an answer, well, we had that many page views and the page views went up 18% or something like this. These are not the answers typically, the way how you apply data sources. What you want to get out of your data is something that is actionable. So for example, in this case would be, well, if some of the organic traffic went down from certain pages and we lost rankings, check the SEO content, change your call to actions on this, or to restructure certain pages because customer behavior may have changed. So, but what is really important on this one is that you have a very good plan of how you are asking a question, which sources you have, and how you're arriving at your conclusions. If you don't have that plan in place, it will be very difficult to get some value out of your data solution. Moving on to the next slide. So how are we going to do this, and how we are going to deal with this here at American Eagle in the way where we're seeing the opportunity? So on a very basic level, what we're doing is we're combining actually content strategy. We're not getting rid of it, but we're defining it much more than what it is today. We're finding content strategy is kind of hard to understand these days. So for some people, content strategy is blogging. For some people, it is literally planning. So we're defining content strategy more as this high level first step towards your content effort. We're defining the second element of your content experience that is necessary, content marketing. We're actually more and more calling it this content tactics, because it is really following your strategy on there. And then content governance. So if you are able to put all three into a concert, and you create them into a dependent structure, and you create a cohesive relationship, you have the best shot at creating this content experience structure. So if you think back to this quote from Steve Jobs in the very beginning, where he literally said, think about the experience first, and then think about how many articles you would use. Then think about content strategy, right, is really your long-term planning tool. And I have a little bit more information on the next slide here, what these components are. So content strategy is really your data-driven strategy. This is all your data intelligence goes into your content planning. You understand which content works, what content you need and why, and which content drives acquisition, which one drives engagement, and which one drives conversion. Content marketing executes your content strategy. So this is putting everything in place. And when people ask me, so what's the difference? Do you have a practical example? So content strategy, for example, would be saying we need a blog, and content marketing would actually be executing on that and creating blog posts. So that would be the difference between the two of them. And then content governance is really the tool that keeps both of them in check and will make sure that the strategy that is formulated in the beginning is actually on path. So it helps content marketing create content. There is content planning in there. There is content standards. There's content styles in there. There's content tools in there that are standardized. So it creates the best possible chance that content strategy and content marketing can work in concert. But in order to enable content experience, you always need three. You always need those three components. So the question is, what we're getting often from our clients is, well, what do you want us to do? Now that you kind of tell us that content experience really goes towards the strategy planning and the marketing planning, and we help them plan out these things. We help them out how a content strategy is planned. So we do this, for example, through largely through business analysis and a gap analysis, what stands between the data that exists on the website and the business. And we're creating that long-term content plan for them. We're helping them execute on that by helping them with content training and content services that we have here. And we also provide services that would help them get their governance team in place and find processes that work. But we still get the question then, well, what do you want us to do? And what you should do is, I think you have three choices on there. The first one is, well, you're doing great. Right, so you have great retention rates, you have great lead capture rates, you're growing at least at 5 to 10% year over year. You keep your competitors at distance. At that point, I would say you have to keep doing what you're doing because you're doing fantastic. And there's just a recommendation to execute based on what you have. Some places start questioning and says, well, is there something more? Is there something that we could be doing more? And could we create new processes? Are there new ways? Are there any rules that we should be thinking of? At that point, we're typically saying, well, maybe start exploring your options. There are certain audits that you can do, check the health of your website and see if there are any gaps in there. And the third one is, well, we are behind and we're panicking. Then you kind of need to take action, and then you do need to start thinking about where the trend is going. And the trend is definitely going, tying together your strategy, the long-term plan, with a very solid execution plan, and your governance. So these are those three things that you think of. And just briefly, what more detail about what we offer at American Eagle. So we do offer a very preliminary content experience audit that would simply look at a high-level analysis, what the opportunities of a website may be. We do have a analysis that goes much deeper into it, that analyzes structures of a website, the way how structures work together, and it actually opens up the opportunities, the analytical opportunities, the low-hanging fruit that could be done. We do provide training in all areas of creating and maintaining strategy, helping your content team perform better, training them in, from article writing to process maintenance to collaboration, those kind of things. Same thing with content governance, where we are building processes and tools for organizations. And then a third one is we build full content experiences from the ground up for our organizations. That is the last slide that I have.
Okay, thanks, Wolfgang. Appreciate that. That was really great. So with that, we're going to turn things over to Matt, who's going to describe the recommendations system.
Great, thank you, Bill. So when we talk about recommendations, of course, you probably think about products that you might want to purchase, content that you might want to read, but also something else that can be done in a similar way are person-to-person recommendations, recommending who you might want to collaborate with. So we'll talk a lot about products and content, but really all of what we talk about can be applied to people as well. And we'll talk about the approach that we use. One of the challenges is intuitively people might think of product characteristics, individual characteristics, and content characteristics. That can be a challenge, especially from a person standpoint. You can always kind of assign characteristics to content, assuming you can make it structured, which we'll talk about, and products, but people is kind of a challenge. Sometimes you can have a profile, you can provide surveys, but getting people to fill those out can be a challenge, but also they might not always say and do the same things. So a big part of what our hybrid model recommendation system considers is both what do people do and what are characteristics to people and products. For example, I refer to transactions here, but it's really any touch point, any activity. It could be clicking on an email, browsing a web page, participating in a community, for example. So we use something called collaborative filtering to determine similarity between people and products based on what people do. Meaning it will find people like me based on our common activity and recommend a product or piece of content that person has liked or displayed some sort of preference for, but I have not. Another important thing to note is preferences is an important concept where you can also have negative preferences. For example, if somebody doesn't participate in a community or somebody doesn't open or click through to certain types of emails, that's something else you can measure about people, products, and content. So in addition to that, what do I do similarity, we also consider what I described initially, characteristics of people and products. And in some cases, we need to rely on that. Maybe it's a new product or the person doesn't have history. And we'll talk more about that a little later. Something else we mix in is the traditional affinity analysis, also known as market basket analysis. That's more of a direct, numeric, kind of probability-based type of thing. And then finally, I talked about how sometimes what people say they're interested in and what they do doesn't always match, or they may not complete profiles. Once you build up enough of this history of what people do, you can essentially create a customer profile and essentially work backwards. So now you have that profile going forward that you can continuously adjust based on the preferences and what people do and not do. So this describes that hybrid model a little bit that I talked about. Again, the approach of collaborative filtering is if you and I have a lot of overlap in our preferences, there might be something that you've liked or purchased that I have not. So that will be recommended to me. And what content-based is, that's based on the characteristics and attributes that I described. And something else that's key is making structure out of unstructured content that we'll talk about. And also the affinity analysis, which that's a lot of times that's what people think of, is people who have bought this product tend to buy another product. And in a lot of cases, that's at the basket or sort of shopping level. But in the association world, people so frequently just can purchase one or two products at a time, or purchase small or consume small pieces of content at a time. It's kind of taken over it's considered over the aggregate as opposed to sort of that basket approach. The other thing that we consider as well is sometimes the algorithm may not provide very good results, or the customer desires to provide results in a different way. And examples of where the results may not be as highly ranked as we would like is that scenario where maybe somebody doesn't have a lot of history. But another important scenario is how you manage your products and content. For example, sometimes we'll see for an annual meeting, there may be the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday registrations. If those are all treated as separate disjointed products, the results won't be as good. Similar to if there's content that is in email, on a website, in maybe a social post, if that's treated as different content and not simply delivered through a different channel, the results won't be as good. So some of those more general things that we can consider as well are simply most popular products. And I kind of put that in air quotes because really it's however we determine a preference to be. Also, what's trending. For example, if something suddenly has a lot of interest that historically has not, that can kind of move to the top as well. And then there might be scenarios where something is new, but the customer really wants to highlight. So they can also kind of insert featured products in the results as well. And one of the challenges, again, with content is it to be really to be the most useful is applying some structure to it, such as understanding what is that content about through a taxonomy or other ways of natural language processing. There are some ways to build models if you have a good amount of history that's accurate, but if you don't, that can be a challenge. So something that we've been working on is automatically tagging content, where we take a standard taxonomy and we might start with keywords, and then we compile synonyms from those keywords, and then we compile something known as word embeddings that is really fascinating, where words will be considered similar, but they're not synonyms per se. So what the outcome is essentially, it's kind of like a giant document that you can then kind of compare against other documents and apply tags to that unstructured and unseen content. In terms of how it's delivered, we talked about the importance of the entire experience, considering all touch points and channels. So it's available through an API that can provide near real-time results, and that same API can be used for a website, for mobile applications, partner websites, and also within context. For example, how did the person enter the website? What area of the website are they on? Maybe where did they click from? And that's an important point as well. You might, when we talk about recommending content to people, you might think, what if people aren't logged in, or that's not something we want to address in our privacy policy, there's still a lot of useful information at the product level. For example, even if somebody isn't logged in, you might discover similar products through a variety of ways, through collaborative filtering or the content based we've talked about, or something like what products tend to be browsed together in the same session. So there's still a lot of value, even if it's anonymous data. And some other applications in addition to kind of what we're accustomed to with website navigation and website personalization is individualized and custom marketing. We also make the data available in bulk format. So for example, if you have a new product that you want to market, you may find similar products and say, well, what people have liked those similar products? They might like these products as well. The same with people. Also, essentially doing interactive discovery. If you're thinking about pricing strategies or how you might want to bundle products, that's where you can kind of see what products and content tend to have a similar audience, for example. Something else that's important is that feedback loop. Wolfgang talked about the importance of measurement. So something we can do is track when recommendations are made using the API, and then capture if there was any action taken, such as clicking on them, so we can continuously improve the results. What these next slides show that I'll go through quickly are just essentially visualizations that we provide of that bulk data, where we can see trending and popular products. You can essentially look at a product profile and see who are the likely purchasers, what are the similar products. The same thing with people. You can look at an individual and say what products are they likely to like or have a preference for. And I know I'm using products a lot, but really that's generic. In this case, there's also communities. So what I refer to as products can be content as well, but also, as we mentioned earlier, you could see how this could bring people together in a lot of different ways. So in terms of, not to make it sound too daunting, but I wanted to talk about some of the important things to consider. One, of course, is what signals a preference. Somebody might purchase a high dollar item, or they might open an email. Of course, you want to scale those differently. I also talked about what are negative preferences. Somebody never participates in a community. Somebody doesn't open a certain email. Somebody doesn't show up for meetings. Somebody immediately bounces from a web page, for example. And also, again, it's important to group and manage products and content appropriately. Also, the consistent taxonomy is a big help. I talked about how what people do tends to provide better results, but if you have a consistent taxonomy that you can apply to people, products, and content, that can really help that hybrid approach. Also, sparsity can be a challenge, and that relates to that cold start problem. What if somebody doesn't have a transaction history, or it's a new product? That's where you can do things like look at the taxonomy, look at characteristics of the product, also exclusion criteria. Some obvious things are, you don't want to recommend a meeting that's already happened. You probably don't want to recommend a product or content that somebody regularly consumes. And there are lots of other scenarios where you may not want to push that front and center to somebody. So that's something that's important to consider as well. And I guess I'll note my closing thoughts here. Of course, we talked about all of the different data sources and touch points and how we can improve our content. There are just so many tremendous opportunities that may not be at the top of mind that you can really dig into. More data equals better results. It's not just the volume of data, but again, that diversity of touch points and engagement. And again, attention is limited. Think about yourself and all the content you're consuming. If something is relevant to you, if something is made easy, your customers are going to be happier and get more value from your association.
Okay, Wolfgang, you want to jump in and give us your couple thoughts here?
Yeah, just quickly, when you think about your data content strategy that is data-driven, have a good idea of how much of your data is what you know, right? So typically, what we see most organizations go after is 80% of the content that's produced is goal-driven. It is what you know. It is your solid knowledge and data. 20% is your playground. These are those new ideas that you have. If you don't have a playground for new ideas, you're not going to evolve, but they have to flow into the 80% at some point. So that is really important. The second one is there is a big buzzword out there for a while. It is storytelling, and we're very careful with the storytelling buzzword out there. When you think about storytelling, always remember that you have two audiences, not just one. A lot of organizations, they think about their business as the only audience, but if you don't have anyone who's consuming that content, it doesn't matter. So think about storytelling, having two audiences and targeting that overlap between the two of them. Target your business needs and your audience wants. And the third item here is when you think about quality of content, be always mindful of listening to your reader, to your member, because ultimately your prospect and your member is the one who is determining if your content is of a high quality or not.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. That was really great. Thanks to all of the audience members who participated in the discussion. I think it was a really great session today. I want to remind everybody this is a recurring meeting, so you have access to this and attending all of our future events. And of course, the descriptions of the sessions can be found at the link associationanalytics.com/virtual. And if you're unable to attend, you always can view the recordings. So I'd like to invite everybody to join us next week, where we're going to talk about smart analytics that drive results. We're going to be joined by our friend Greg Pollock, the VP of Sales with the A2. It's the guy in the Mazda here, and it's going to be a great talk. So I hope everybody can join us. So thanks again for a great discussion. Hope your minds are full and your cups are empty, and hope to see you all next week. Have a great day, everybody.